ChatGPT is in vogue this week.
It's just fun. The best tweet that I've seen is I described ChatGPT as mansplaining as a service. So I've seen that a lot. Like I keep using it to try to generate like code for different things. And it's like there will always be one bug in it. So I call it out and it's like, oh yeah, you're right. That is wrong.
If it's already making mistakes, if it can't execute on the simplest things, is that an issue with how it's trained and modeled, or how you're asking for something?
You should treat it as an intern. So it's like you give it a task, you get the task back, but you still need to review it. So you don't have to do all the grunt work, but you got to make sure that you review it after the fact.
The biggest constraint of training anything is how many parameters do you need? And then based on those number of parameters, the supporting data, and do you have a machine that can hold that all?
GPT-3 has, I think, 175 billion parameters.
That it could be around 800 gigabytes of memory, like RAM, just to do a small section of processing.
I asked ChatGPT, what's more likely to happen? Bitcoin be used as a reserve currency or ETH? And it said Bitcoin hands down. So, Brock, I hate to tell you, man, but AI knows a little better than us, so we'll have to just listen to it.
Hey everybody, welcome to Missing Links with John, Brock, and myself, Stephen King, where we discuss what's missing in Web3 architecture. For feedback, please go to missinglinks.fm, send us an email, give us some feedback on what we discuss and what you'd like us to cover next week. All right, let's get into it.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Missing Links with John, Brock, and myself, Stephen. How you guys doing?
Doing
Pretty
good.
All right. Well, ChatGPT is in vogue this week, and we've all been playing around with it. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and how it could be relevant for Web3. And I don't know, let's just kick things off with starting with you, John. What are your general thoughts? Have you been playing with it? What do you think? How's it been relevant in your life so far? And how do you think this will be applicable to what you're doing?
So for me personally, I've played around with some of the bots, like how you can build a bot and ask it to read something and write a story. So that's been entertaining, especially with condensing information. And I think a huge thing is with how much information's out there. I think it's don't quote me on this, but I think there's petabytes of information being produced today. But how much of that information is actually good information? So having something like this that can kind of synthesize it, and I think natural processing language models are pretty good to this point. I don't know. I've asked it to write some Hello World, programs and some very simple things, and it struggled a little bit. But for it telling it to read these 3 websites and then just give a summary, that's pretty good.
Yeah. It's
look at Grammarly. Grammarly is phenomenal. Like how it can detect tone if you're passive or aggressive, and how it can actually understand what you're trying to say and restructure a full block of information to make it more coherent. It's really cool. That all that underlying technology that you see in this OpenAI is so cool.
Yeah, if you were born in 2008, you were born in the perfect time to be going into high school, and with tools that are going to be able to get you through it pretty easily. But I imagine there'll be some things that'll combat that. But Brock, what are your thoughts? I know you've been playing with it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fun. The best tweet that I've seen is I described ChatGPT as mansplaining as a service. So it can give a lot of vague, plausible sounding, fabricated context, but it's not really concerned with whether or not it's right. So I've seen that a lot. I keep using it to try to generate code for different things, and it's there will always be one bug in it. So I call it out, and it's like, oh yeah, you're right, that is wrong, and it'll correct it, but it doesn't check that up front, which is really interesting. But I think it'll be a really useful tool going forward for people that are already creating things.
How so? How's that going to work? Because at the end of the day, if it's already making mistakes, if it can't execute on the simplest things, is that an issue with how it's trained and modeled, or how you're asking for something?
I think
the problem.
Well, I think the main thing with it right now is it's not intended to do all the things we're asking it to do. Like it's just meant to do natural language processing and like chat, right? And so I think from that perspective, you should treat it as an intern. So it's like you give it a task, you get the task back, but you still need to review it. So you don't have to do all the grunt work, but you got to make sure that you review it after the fact.
Yeah, so it's definitely an inflection point to where we were to where we are today. I mean, it just kind of. I guess my other question would be: you have OpenAI, you have DALL-E, you have different models. Why did they all come out around the same time? Do you guys have any insight on that? Is that just how software works? It's sort of there's a breakthrough, and then there's a couple of players that rise to the top pretty quick.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think DALL-E 2 and ChatGPT are both built on top of GPT-3. So there was like the generalized language model, and then both of these tools have been built out on top of it.
Isn't the underlying model like something that's already kind of pre-built and like, or is it something that you have to retrain as you make iterations to it? Do you know, Brock?
My understanding is GPT-3 is it's a pre-trained model. So they trained it on like the internet up to 2021, something like that. Or that's what they did for ChatGPT at least. I think more specifically, ChatGPT is part of their roadmap to GPT-4. So they're calling it like a tool on top of GPT 3.5. So it's like not quite 4, but it's on that path in that direction, trying to see like the improvements they can make from version 3.
So I guess I was thinking of DeepMind. They haven't, but maybe they haven't released anything. Doc AI, and there's a few others. But in terms of the hardware, John, I know there's some things around going from like GPT, let's say, Brock, you said 3.5, and I think GPT. Actually, I don't know what version is going to be where they think we're going to kind of meet the singularity, that moment. But what are the hardware barriers right now? Is it processing? Is it storage? Is it access to data?
I think it's twofold. So I'm not 100% sure how they trained it. They probably trained it in smaller sections. But so the biggest constraint of training anything is how many parameters do you need? And then based on those number of parameters, the supporting data, and do you have a machine that can hold that all? Because as it's training it, it's building out new variations, and those variations have to either be pumped back into the model as a parameter, or the hardware has to be relatively big. And I believe like I saw somewhere that it could be around 800 gigabytes of memory, like RAM, just to do a small section of processing.
I believe it.
Because it needs to store that all in memory to do, like just for a small section. And we're talking like petabytes. Like I think
GPT-3.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, GPT-3 has, I think, 175 billion parameters. Yeah.
That's a lot of
parameters. Google built one with 1 trillion parameters.
Yeah, I think
I don't know what their engine's called.
GPT-4 is supposed to be in that. Today. Yeah.
So where do we see a use case of this? I see this being very useful, like people who work in call centers. Like I don't see that ever being a thing anymore, especially like for simple tasks. Like, hey,
they're coupling it with. I've been playing around with a couple of apps that are around video and voice, and the voice sound really realistic. And there's actually a platform that is doing it for call centers, and you can talk to it sort of like Open or ChatGPT. It sort of responds in the same way, but it layers you can kind of tell. Actually, you know what? I couldn't tell with some of them. Some of the voices are that good. So I think call centers will definitely be a big one.
Yeah, where it will say, hey, you're talking to a humanoid, if you want to call it that. And I've had that with Apple where I've called into like support and I've given it like a full sentence, and for the most part it knew exactly what it is. And especially when you bake in like custom layering on top of that, based on your phone number or who you called, you can give unique parameters to the already pre-trained parameters that help it be more personable. And I think that's the human touch right there. Now, if it sounds real or not, I think that's one thing or another.
Well, and whether or not it matters if it sounds real.
Well, what about coding though? Because Brock, you were playing around on the coding side. You were trying to get it to basically write code for you, and it was getting an error, but I think you said it was only getting one error. So I don't know. Is that a scary thing for some level of developer, maybe entry level developer?
I don't think so. I think it's a new tool so that all developers can level up. Hypothetically, so like we don't program in assembly language anymore or deal with zeros and ones. Like we have all these like meta languages. So you could almost imagine like AI being like another meta programming language where we're giving prompts as we're coding instead of having to write all of that code ourselves.
So there is a interesting language, TLA, which is temporal logic, layer logic. I gotta look it up, but it's pretty much something one of my researchers showed me, where you can represent as metacode certain states in certain types of conditions, and it will simulate that the logic works at a high level. So for chat, for this, OpenAI to work, I think if it can reasonably write out logic and that logic can be converted, a lot of those underlying errors that are really hard to train out of a model would be solved. Because it's doing all the thinking at a high level, like this button should do this. So if you have that kind of relationship, the code's relatively simple. There's only so many ways to write a button or to do a loop. Sure. I just asked it to build an app, and it couldn't build an app. It told me how I could potentially build an app with Xcode, but it didn't tell me how. It didn't give me actual code. And this looks like it actually was scraped off the Apple website, funny enough.
That's funny. I mean, it should be able to give you some code. Like it's not going to do multi-files, but if you ask for like a specific function, like give me a hello world in, I don't know, whatever language you're using.
I already did that one. Well, let's see.
Okay.
Write a button in iOS Swift.
Yeah, like I've been using it.
There you go. Wow.
Yeah. See. So I've been doing Advent of Code, which is
yeah, but
well, it's 25 days of like coding challenges, and so I give the same prompts to ChatGPT like after I figure it out, and it gets like 95% of the way there on the first try, and if you prompt it a couple more times, it usually gets it right.
Swift isn't a good example though, because Apple makes it so easy. It already has autocomplete, and it's got other. I mean, I feel like I can write in Swift, and I'm not a programmer. So, but Brock, your other example is a good one.
I was gonna say I just told it write a TCP connection in C.
Yeah, like I was asking it how to do GCP auto scaling for Node.js and Cloud Run, and it gave me like the whole configuration file to do it.
Well, it even knows the sys library imports correctly. Okay, for C, that's impressive. But I'm curious now, the variable names, how it's detecting variable names, is that because it's seen an example and that was the variable name, or it just knows that for variable names, they need to be descriptive in a certain way, depending on the paradigm of the language?
What would be awesome if we could feed it our design for our website and have it write the HTML or whatever, we were going to write the front end in, basically translate that into code. Does that exist yet?
You can get close-ish with ChatGPT. Like you can ask it to write a landing page in React, and it'll like come up with some stuff, and you can separately ask it to write the marketing copy for it. It just kind of gets into like ChatGPT is trained for natural language, so it's more like talking back and forth. but I think the same principles should be applied to like, okay, build this large scale code base for me.
That's awesome. All right, well, let's look at it in terms of Web3, right? So we have artificial intelligence. It's centralized. It moves fast. The data is ever changing, and it's kind of opaque in terms of it's hard to like. There's a bunch of paywalls in the existing web, and it's not even scraping the web. It's basically downloaded. I don't know, the internet from pre 2019. Maybe it's further than that now, but it's not actively crawling the internet. Whereas blockchain is decentralized, and the data is immutable, and it's got more of a transparency ethos, right? So it seems like these two go hand in hand. Now, I asked ChatGPT, I said, how will you guys work together? And it didn't really go into, I asked for details too, and it didn't really, it focused on how AI is going to make blockchain, it's going to enhance blockchain rather than how blockchain is going to enhance AI. Because I think the openness of the data is going to really add a ton of value and speed things up. And but I'm not building in the space, so maybe there's something there I don't see. Do you guys agree? Disagree? Doesn't really make a difference.
I think there's potentially a world where it works like that. My only concern is that with having AI models in Web3, at the end of the day, the model there has to be like a protocol or some type of mechanism where you can constantly update and change models based on data. And that's the biggest thing. The reason why ChatGPT works so well, even for the mistakes it does, is it's very centralized because there's so much information in all that hardware and all those components. I got it to crash, funny enough. So I think to get those two things to work in harmony, my question would become, what are the hardware implications of that? Because at the end of the day, everything needs hardware. And second of all, what problem are we trying to solve? Like, what are we trying to detect something? Like, how do you see it fit together? Like, what's the problem we'll try to solve?
So I've seen a few applications of this already, and I think, Stephen, you touched on both what's the pro and the con of blockchain data with AI is, one, it's transparent, so it's freely available. It's really easy to get a large data set to train on. And the flip side is it's always changing, or it's always growing. So trying to get that new data set and retrain the model is really tough. But we're already seeing people use it for, say, like auditing smart contracts. So you can like pull a contract off the blockchain and ask ChatGPT to audit it for you. So it'll like, okay, is there a way to exploit this contract? And it'll like tell you if there is. And then I think there's also a world, like we're seeing some companies start to try to feed in blockchain data into AIs for like risk analysis. So like historically tracking, like, was this address a bad actor? Or even more nuanced, is this address that's doing this action today, does that resemble what a bad actor might have done based on historical information?
So it's trying to almost, what's that movie where it's like you got arrested before you commit the crime?
Yeah.
Things like that. You're trying to figure out what's the chances of something happening that's bad before it happens.
Yeah. I mean, that could be one application, definitely.
Well, I guess it depends on. Yeah, you're right. It depends on the application, right? Because if you're using it for, driving, you don't want dynamic. Well, you would want dynamic. You would kind of want static, and you would want dynamic data, because you would want to know. I mean, there's only so many variables that you can account for, right? So yeah, stop at a stop sign. Another vehicle or object jets out in front of you. You can account for those. But if somebody like jerks their arm because they have a spasm or something, I don't know. There's certain things that maybe you can't account for, because that's just life, right? There's just endless possibilities on things that could happen. So I guess when it comes to blockchain, though, that is, it is ever changing, but it is also kind of static in the terms of its structure. So could you train it to train itself or just update itself continuously?
I know there are ways you can train models. There are ways where you take a full model, and what you do is you take, let's say your model's 100 gigs or something, or let's just make it 10 gigs. You take 1 gig, you slice that out, compound that as your new model, and then train it against that, and then do some verification, and then you just keep slicing it and iterating over until you get a certain degree of confidence when testing that you're happy with. And we're starting to see that anyway with like smart cars, Teslas, they do that automatically. They'll if it doesn't see something and you report it, then eventually you'll start seeing it. And that's kind of one thing that's really cool. And this goes back to the idea of that we have so much data out there. But would it be better if we had more open data or more open metadata? What would be more valuable, especially in the early days of trying to integrate a lot of these technologies?
Yeah, well, I asked ChatGPT, what's more likely to happen? Bitcoin be used as a reserve currency or ETH? And it said Bitcoin hands down. So, Brock, I hate to tell you, man, but AI knows a little better than us, so we'll have to just listen to it.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's end it. Let's end it there, and we'll chat more about this stuff at another time. But if you like the episode, rate it in Apple or Spotify, and then any feedback at missinglinks.fm. Adios, amigos.